Martin, welcome you all to you. We're about to start our 34th day of public hearings. This is the beginning of the 6th session. And just looking to see whether I see Mrs. Rodney, but she's very much with us. We welcome her too, and I invite her to come to stand as the first witness.
Dr. Rodney, would you like to affirm or take a vote this morning?
She got a statement.
Which one, please? Would you like to take an oath undivided, or would you like to make an application this morning? Marshall, please, please. Patricia Rodney, do you swear that the evidence that you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Chairman, your leave, I propose to leave the evidence of this witness. Dr. Rodney, you prefer to sit or stand? I guess we can start by standing, and if you feel inclined, you can sit. For the purposes of this commission, Dr. Rodney, did you prepare a statement?
Yes, I did.
And that statement was submitted to the commission?
Yes.
And if you see a copy of it, will you recognize it?
Yes.
And you have such a copy in your hand?
I do.
And you recognize the set of statement that you produced?
Yes, it is.
I think we can be speedy for everybody. Just take the amount. I have been put more to Johnson.
Indeed, Mr. Chairman. I was just trying to get through the formalities.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be sure that the commissioners all have a copy of the statement before them.
I think that is correct. Trying to make sure that we are fully equipped.
And I think the copy that we have.
Her copy?
Yes, I want to see the signature. Do we have? I think what we could do is ask, I don't know if the chairman is appropriate at this stage, but perhaps we could make sure it's the signature.
Indeed.
The one that is on record here.
As the commission would be aware, all this entire statement would have been submitted electronically, so that we can formally undertake to sign the statement. Or we can do that.
And after 30 now,
Indeed.
one for the files in this line.
Great procedure.
The list in public is the annual pilgrim of the representative that needed to witness after the official law.
Please. Just invite the witness to sign a copy of the statement and submit formally to the commission secretariat. And confirm that that is a statement of 21 pages that you would have submitted to this commission.
Yes.
One main correction I wanted to draw to your attention. Dr. Rodney, at page 10, perhaps I should invite, we should make it next to the court first. But we could just make it PR1.
The correction first.
Correction is page 10. In the final final sentence of the middle section, in that a paragraph which has the caption, Patricia Rodney returned to Guyana from Jamaica in 79. The last sentence in that section reads in May 1974. Am I correct? That should be May 1980.
May 1980. That was
So 74,
Becomes 1980.
May 1980. You were heard as a research assistant and director of the assistant. No wish to play. The statement we visited the evidence.
And marked PR1, that's it.
Time PR1 attached. PR1. Yeah. All copies of everyone is quick for the copy. Well, please proceed.
Great. Dr. Rodney, in your first section of your statement, you give us an introduction to your meeting of Walter Rodney, and you give some history of your knowledge of him even before you knew him, in the sense that he had some reputation.
Yes.
And you go on to say that that there were many of the girls who knew had a crush on him.
Yes.
I want you to tell the commission, in the early stages when you met him and saw him, what was your general impression of young Walter Rodney?
Walter was very fun, loving. He loved dancing just like any teenager. But he also was a very kind and thoughtful person. His capacity to relate to a wide cross section of people at that time.
In the early stages of your getting to know him, when you first saw him speaking on platforms and so on, was there any particular impression that you garnered from that?
He was very forthright and honest, and he made complex things seem very simple. Everybody knew about his brilliance, but that never took precedence over the kind of person he was. Very simple person. He would walk into this room and you wouldn't know who he was. He was a very low-key person.
You wouldn't describe him as being showy?
He wasn't a show-off, he wasn't arrogant.
When you had given in your statement indication that you were aware of his work when you were in Jamaica, and much of that work involved dealing with grassroots people. How would you describe how he went about that work and his approach to that work?
As I said, in my statement I said when I first visited Jamaica, I was very impressed by the beauty and the large houses in Jamaica. And Walter, after hearing my observations, said he wanted me to see a different side of Jamaica, which was very disconcerting to me. When he started actually teaching at the university, because Walter had lived in Jamaica for 3 years before, he already knew Jamaicans and knew Jamaica. So he not only lectured on the campus, but lectured off campus to anybody who wanted him to talk to them. Whether it was at a playground or a community center, he just engaged people. He didn't lecture. He just sat around and might in a bar. Although he never drank, he would sit around in a bar just talking to people. about social conditions.
And that approach, did that continue then when he was in England?
Yes. Our favorite place to go to during the summer was Hyde Park. And I don't know how many people know Hyde Park, but people got up and spoke about frivolous things. And once Walter became a speaker, people started coming in large numbers because he was speaking about the role of West Indian and other immigrants, workers, and their contribution to the British system and the way in which they were being treated. And I think once he began to do that, of course the surveillance started noticing him.
As early as in England?
As early as in England, as I can remember.
And this willingness to communicate with grassroots people and so on, how did that translate eventually on your return to Guyana in terms of his approach?
I think it was the same approach wherever we lived. Walter was the kind of person who didn't isolate himself in a community that he was supposed to be. That was part of the criticism that for an educated man, he had all these working class friends. I don't think Walter ever forgot where he came from, that his parents were working class people, and that he was committed to ensuring the working class had a good quality of life. So he was involved at a community level, wherever that was. In Guyana, we used to call it bottom house meetings, which meant that because the houses are built on stilts, people could meet under the house.
And did you see, when he returned to Guyana and began to do his work here and to interact with people here, did you see any limits? Did you see him setting any limits on who he was approaching in his outreach, if any thought?
No, he was interested in the youth and working people. He was never interested. For sociologists, people tend to separate gender, race, class. Walter always saw the working class as the vibrant class, the production class, and so his focus was on working people. Whether they were in a community, a church, he would speak anywhere.
And so your impression in Guyana then was that he wasn't interested in speaking, for example, only to PNC, only to PPP, only to WPA, only to Black, only to Indian. What was your impression in terms of that?
Walter was very concerned about the divisions. I grew up in a Guyana that was more inclusive. What we saw on our return, where people were separated into their parties by race. Walter was interested in making sure that people came together in all situations. And I think one of the things he did was to write the children's books, which started out as a radio series, talking about each race, what each race brought to Guyana, how vibrant this could be if people came together. Only 2 of those books were published, Kofi Badu out of Africa and Lakshmi out of India. And he hoped that these books would make the children understand each other better and be able to work with each other in a more harmonious way.
And it seems, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Pickering, you have repeatedly referred to Walter's return to Guyana. Just could you remind us when this was, in terms of putting it in the context of our here?
Well, it needed, I need to remind you that you run ahead because who are here and who have the space to relations with water. There are many distant private places in our way to step back a little at the convenient point.
Very good to you, Chair. Just for the record then, Dr. Rodney, who are you in relation to Walter Rodney?
His wife, I married Walter in 1965 in London, England.
The two of you had children?
3 children, Shaka, Panini, and Asha. Shaka was born in London, Panini and Asha were born in Tanzania.
I'm curious to know the date of birth of these children because to see how it relates to the period you're concerned.
Can you give us Shaka's birth date?
Shaka was born in 1966, Panini in 1969, and Asha in 1971.
So Shaka would have been approximately 14 or so in 1980.
He turned, his birthday is in July the 5th, and Walter was killed on June the 13th.
And Panini approximately 11.
Yes.
And Asha approximately 9.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the return to Guyana, can you just describe for me in terms of the decision to return, what was Walter's approach to the return?
Walter was very excited about the return. We had been in Tanzania over 7 years. We realized that the children were getting older and they did not know their grandparents or their extended family. And Walter felt he had done what he could in somebody else's country. We could have gained citizenship. We were encouraged to become citizens. But Walter decided he wanted to return to Guyana and to use his knowledge to educate the people of Guyana. Walter always felt that he could not have had that education without the struggle of working peoples and that he owed it to them to come back and serve.
So when you prepared then for the return, did you personally, did you expect a pushback against the return?
No, we didn't. I left Tanzania before Walter did. I left in May 1974 and came to Ghana because he had accepted the position. So the children and I came to Ghana and I stayed with my sister. Walter stayed on in Tanzania for the Pan-African Congress, and then he went on to Atlanta to do the Summer Institute at the Institute of the Black World. And I think it's in between there he understood that he was going to get a job. Also, I had some indication when I went to obtain a letter from the university in order to buy a home. I needed a letter of his employment, and I was told, your husband is not getting the job. So I was able to communicate that to Walter, and he said he was coming to Guyana. We were already there, we were situated. He was coming to Guyana. Even if he had to drive a taxi to support his family, he was going to come.
So you seemed quite determined at that point to
Yes.
tell our what he was coming
Yes.
from. Now, a number of witnesses before the commission have given indication that they were aware of harassment and aware of arrests and so on by various armed forces and forces of the state. Can you tell us, I know it's in your statement, but give us an indication what your experience was in terms of harassment?
Well, myself and the children we had, for example, I'll give you an example. It was very subtle at first. We had made arrangements for carpooling our children to school. And so this particular family would pick our kids up and their kids and drop them off to school in the morning. and we would pick them up at lunchtime. And just out of the blue one day, the guy said, I can't take your children to school anymore because I have to go to work much earlier. The children's school started at 7. And I said, if it's earlier, we will make sure that the girls are ready on time. He said, no, I can't take them. And subsequently, we heard that he had been told to stay away from the Rodneys, that they were a bad influence. So even the children stopped coming to play with my children.
Sorry, Dr. That would be encouraged to you, but Walter was the possession of a letter saying that he was appointed professor.
Dr. Rodney?
Yes, he was in possession of a letter saying he was appointed.
And you understood that letter to have come from?
Whoever is using from the university.
And it was on that basis that you decided to
It was on
relocate
that basis that we relocated
from Tanzania?
from Tanzania to Guyana. And Walter had several other offers. He chose to come to Guyana. So we could have gone anywhere. But that wasn't the only offer at the table.
You said that the harassment at first was subtle and it manifested in terms of the approach of people around you and so on. Tell us then when it became less subtle.
It became less subtle when our home was constantly searched. Just out of the blue, men in uniform, without uniform, would turn up to our home and claim they were looking for arms and ammunition. They never found anything and they left. At one time, it got we had to move out of our house. I had to move my parents out of our home because there were threats that our house was going to be bombed. So our family had to be separated. My daughter stayed with relatives, my son stayed with a friend, and Walter and I stayed in what was called safe homes or safe houses.
What did that actually mean? You would go, what would that mean?
I never knew where the safe house would be that night. We couldn't stay in the same house every time. We had to be changing houses. So somebody would offer their house and we would go and sleep there.
How did this affect your family life?
It affected my children tremendously. They wanted to be home, and I remember my daughter Kanini said that the three of them had a meeting and decided they wanted to come home. They didn't want not to be in their own home. And so we sat down with them and talked about safety measures, that not to open unidentified boxes, mail. We coached them through being safe.
And during this period, what was happening in terms of Walter being harassed? Was he ever the result of these searches and other activities, but what was the result in terms of any intervention?
Mr. Pilgrim, could you present timeline?
We're all talking about after 74, 75, your return. But do you recall when was the first time perhaps that Walter would have been arrested? I don't know if you have a date, maybe a year.
Probably 7 to 6, I'm not certain. But they were short arrests. You could be arrested, just picked up, and then released without any charges.
And that happened more than once.
Several times.
But you were never arrested yourself?
No.
And during this period, did you see Walter's popularity in Guyana? How would you describe it in the period going from your arrival through to 1980?
I would say Walter's popularity increased tremendously. I remember I was a student at the University of Ghana, and we had gone to Linden. I had gone to Linden with several lecturers from the university, and people identified me. I was nowhere, and there was, people came up saying, "Oh, we're so glad that Walter's back and that he's looking out for us," and things like that. And we saw the political meetings increase tremendously.
In terms of the numbers?
Numbers of people who came out to meetings.
No. Walter himself, how would you describe his ambition politically?
I know this is hard to believe. Walter never had any political ambitions. Walter never wanted to be a member of government. Walter's whole thing was about education of people, mobilizing the masses so that they understood and could be in charge of their own future. He was not interested in political office. He felt that even if his party won power, he wanted to be there to be critical and analytical about what was going on. To my knowledge, he never wanted to have any reins of power.
And during this period in which popularity is growing, harassment is increasing, what was Walter's attitude to people who harassed him or people who made life difficult for him to want to go ahead and serve?
Walter was a very patient, non-violent person. I remember one incident. I had taken him to the airport. I think he was going to Trinidad to do something with the World Council of Churches, the Caribbean Council of Churches. And when we got to the airport, Walter traveled very light. The heaviest thing Walter would carry his books and paper so he could write all the time. And when we got to the counter, the clerk was very rude and dismissive. He had a briefcase and he had a bag, and she said, "You can't take those on the plane. You only allow one piece of luggage." And Walt said, "Well, I don't have a suitcase, this is all I have." She said, "You heard what I said, you can't take that on the plane." And then another passenger said, "Walter, let me take your bag for you." And I was very upset. And Walter said, don't bother. That young woman is just a victim of circumstances. Actually, when we were held for hours at the Trinidadian airport, when we got to Trinidad to attend another meeting, I was ahead of Walter in the line, and when the immigration officer asked me why I was there, I said, "Well, my husband had come to have a meeting." And he said, "Does your husband have a work permit?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, he's in the line." So by the time Walter got up to the line, he said, "I have to check this out. Why you're here?" Walter said, "I'm here to participate in the Caribbean Council of Churches. I'm doing a series of workshops with all the Caribbean ministers." He said, "No, you're going to sit there." And we sat there for the next 2 hours waiting for him to make his telephone calls. Walter wasn't upset, as far as I can tell. He just took out a book and he was reading and writing.
You would let his temper get the better of him in this situation?
No, I've never seen his temper.
Have you ever known him to be aggressive and argumentative in response to the harassment that you saw?
No, not at all.
Have you ever known him to be involved in arming persons or arming himself?
No, I've never seen a gun in my house. I've never seen Walter carry a weapon, ever.
So that after Walter's death in 1980, did you ever hear anyone making allegations that Walter had firearms or that he was acquiring firearms or acquiring ammunition and so on and so forth?
No, not until about 4 years ago, when a documentary was done by Clayman Chung, I think it was. Then in one of the interviews, it says that, you know, the WPA was gathering arms and ammunition. That's the first time I had heard about it.
And indeed, during the course of the last few days, some statements were served on us, and I showed you a statement of a Mr. Carl Martindale, who made certain suggestions about Walter being involved in acquiring a gun. Did you ever hear anything about that during the course of the last 34 years?
No, never.
No.
Some clarification. When he was arrested all these times, how was he treated?
He was treated well, I think. He didn't come home with any bruises.
I'm not aware of him being beaten up by the police and this type of thing.
No.
By the time May, June of 1980 is coming around, there are a number of different things that have happened, including the death of Father Dark is really the low water mark of it all. What was Walter's attitude at that time to the work you were doing and so on? Work he was doing, I beg your pardon.
I'm sorry, for the public, could you assist us around what dates?
The date of Father Dark is
That was around the time of the trial.
it's the second appearance of the
It's actually
I think that's online, so I don't know if the Secretary has July 79 is correct. In the period, let's say from the middle of 1979 to June 1980, with the death of Father Dark, the murder of Father Dark, what was Walter's attitude at that stage, like many of the things that were happening?
I think when Father Dark was murdered, we were all shocked. Shocked and sad because, to my knowledge, that had never happened in Guyana before, so it seemed to put some kind of tarnish on our society, especially where a priest could be murdered for being a photographer. That was quite shocking to us. And then when Bohini was murdered, it's the day, early in the day, Bohini was at our house, early in that day. And as
We referred to him in the record earlier as COI.
yes,
During that particular day,
he spent a long time at our house talking to Walter. And Walter was going to visit his parents who we lived in West Randall. No, his parents lived in West and we lived on Arbor Barker Street. And he asked Bohini if he would give him a ride to his parents. And then Bohini said, yes, I'll wait on you. And then it was getting late and Walter said, no, because he didn't want to take the car. We only had one car. And he said, no, Pat will drop me off. So it's okay, you can go ahead. And that soon after we heard that he was murdered, not too far away from where we lived.
when did you have occasion to discuss that situation with Walter? And what if anything, did you all say about that situation?
It was getting quite scary. We all didn't know what was happening, and I think at a personal level we discussed about the children's safety and my safety. At one time, we talked about me leaving Guyana and going to stay with friends, other places, but then we decided that no, we will stay. So we did discuss the seriousness of what was happening and what. There's only so many precautions you could take. Walter always told me I shouldn't allow fear to make me a prisoner in my own home, and that when I said I was afraid for him, he said that he could walk out our door and be hit by a drunken driver and will not have achieved anything in life. So it's not that he treated it very lightly, he was very conscious of what was happening, but he felt that he had a commitment to do the kind of work he was doing in terms of building the solidarity between the races in Guyana. That took precedence, I think.
The Walter that you knew, it seemed to you like he was encouraging any, in modern term would be personality cult around himself. I just want to be very clear as to whether you had the impression that he was starting to build his prowess as a leader of people and trying to make this leadership push at any time.
Not at all. Walter was the simplest person, and I tried to use some examples. I remember once, as I said, my parents lived in the flat below us, and my father was very involved with the union, and one of the union representatives, Mr. Agar, who was like my uncle, was then very high up in the union and came to see my father, and he came up in this chauffeur-driven car, and he came into a yard, passed the man that he saw there, and went in to talk to my dad. And he called my dad Freddie. And he said, Freddie, all this time I'm your friend and you never introduced me to your son-in-law. And my dad said, you just passed him up there. The guy assumed he was either a laborer or the car, because Walter was building a double house for the kids. He was very good at his hands. He built all their bookshelves, and he was out in the yard working. So the man thought he was a laborer, and of course you don't talk to laborers. And so he passed him, or you don't talk to working people.
And the laborer turned out to be
Walter Rodney.
No.
I'm sorry, could you clarify for me what union this man who belongs to labor?
You know what union is?
I can't remember, but it was representing workers. All unions, most unions represented workers.
Now, at page 14 of your statement, you describe travel to Zimbabwe in May 1980.
Yes.
Now,
Before we go there, because we're
sorry.
starting off, Walter was very conscious of the dangers connected to the work in which he was involved. He was committed to continuing that work in the environment. Was he concerned that he might be killed or could be killed?
Well, I think the illustration I tried to use is that he felt that, he could sit down and do nothing, and perhaps he's walking on the street, he's in a traffic accident, or some drunken driver not to him. He was...
Yes, I heard that that we are always a danger of that, but do you think that he would be killed in the course of that work after he was embarked? And because of that?
I learned he must have, I'm not sure, Walter. The way we were able to leave Guyana so quickly is because Walter had said to friends in Barbados, if anything ever happens to you, you need to come and spend time with our children. So I think he was conscious that there were dangers around his life. And that wasn't the first attempt it was made on his life. As you heard before, he had to be running, and he was described as a good high jumper and things like that. So I don't think that was the first attempt that was made on his life.
Did you personally know, did you have a fear? Is it something, quite often with 2020 vision, looking back, one can say, oh yes, we knew all along that these things were there. But you living at the time, yes, you had these threats in your home, you had harassment. What was the extent of your fear at that time coming into April, May of 1980?
My fear wasn't, I was afraid. I was afraid for Walter. But I never let my fear paralyze me from going out, looking after my parents, looking after my in-laws, making sure that the children, because if I'm afraid, then I will transmit that fear to them. And I wanted them to have a normal as life as they possibly could under the conditions that we were living. And we had a lot of support from friends, some in the audience, who would take the children swimming. We engaged the children in lots of activities. They were in, well, not shaka, they were in dancing, they were in judo, they were in swimming. They were always engaged. Shaka was quite an athlete himself, so we kept them as busy as they could and as normal as they could. And if I could jump back to when I was studying in Jamaica for that year, Walter, with the assistance of my parents, looked after the children. And my mother told me when I came back, she was often embarrassed because Walter would insist on combing the girls' hair, which he couldn't do. And she felt ashamed that the children were going out looking like this. And there was no color coordination. Anything the children wanted to wear, they would wear, and we would take them to the archives. They knew about the archives from very small. They would take a hand broom because the place was so dusty, and they would help their dad to sweep up the archives. So he took them everywhere that he went.
And so there was an attempt by you all to
normalize as much as we could the situation.
I'm sorry, Mr. Clinton, just because we just said it a while ago. She said that is why we were able to leave so quickly. And I believe she was referring to what was recorded at page 19 of her statement, which is our evidence in chief, which records that she left Guyana 17 days after her husband died. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
We tried to do some of that in more detail when we get there, man. But this stage, more trying to get the character and personality of the man and his attitude and so on.
Because she mentioned it.
Yes, ma'am, great to see you, ma'am. So in terms now of the Zimbabwe visit, which is back on page 14. Paragraph 2 states, reports originating from Zimbabwe indicated that Walter's presence at the celebration seemed to disturb President Byrne because Walter was given all diplomatic courtesies and an audience with President Mugabe. May 17, 1980, Walter met with President Mugabe and his ministers to discuss the offer of writing a history of Zimbabwe. Now, all along, is it fair to say Walter was getting various offers of outside options in terms of professional?
That was my pet peeve. Walter would get all these offers from other universities, and he would tell me about it, but he wouldn't take it. And I told him I didn't want you to tell me about the offers if you weren't going to take it, because he didn't want to leave Guyana. This was the first time that he indicated that he was accepting this offer.
He was prepared then to...
We were preparing to leave to Zimbabwe.
You tell us you have good feel for what might have been going through his mind at that time, and all of a sudden he was
I think he felt that the situation was getting worse for myself and the children, for my parents. My mother told me in all her life she had never been to court, she had never had police come to her house. This was a new experience for my in-laws who were harassed as well. And I think he felt we needed a break personally in our own lives. The children needed to be in a situation that was most conducive to their learning. Also, he indicated that he wanted to reassess what was happening in the WPA, and that was all that was said.
Did you ever have an opportunity to flesh out with him what he meant by what was happening in the WPA?
No.
But not in the country, but in the WPA.
About the country and the WPA.
She came down well with those who in the WPA.
Yeah, they were very close. Everybody in the WPA were very close. They were like our extended family.
I bring you then to page 15 of your statement on the evening of the 12th of June 1980. You describe there an incident in which a gentleman appeared at your door. Can you just take us through that?
On the evening of 12th of June, it was around 7:30 p.m. I heard someone knocking at our front door, and I acknowledged that knock, but I did not open the door. I acknowledged the person through the window that was closest to the door. He asked for Walter, and I told him Walter was not at home. And he said I had a meeting with him, meet him at 7, and when we got there, Walter had left.
You understood that meeting was somewhere else then, or that meeting was
Not at our house. Walter very rarely ever had meetings at our house.
And that person was someone you recognized from before, that you knew?
No, I didn't know the person.
And
Did you subsequently get to know who it was?
Yes. Yes, I subsequently knew it was Gregory Smith.
and the next time you saw that person would have been an image in what form?
I think the newspaper.
And that's when you recognized it.
I say as the same person who had come that evening.
Did you take that person's name or any such information on the evening in question?
I didn't. Walter, normally if somebody was coming to the house would say, somebody's coming to the house, he would give a name, is coming to see me. That visit was so unusual, and due to the tensions around what was happening in Ghana, I just took the message from the guy. I never asked him his name. I just took the message and gave it to Walter when he came home.
And the gentleman went his way.
He left, and I noticed he came on foot, that he wasn't driving, and I saw him go around, we lived on Greenheart, that he went around Greenheart Street. We lived on Aubrey Barker and Greenheart, and continued along Greenheart Street that I could see from the bedroom window.
In 3 lines from the bottom of that paragraph, you indicate that you had never met this man, you had never gone to his home, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Claims that he would later make in his book or the book.
He made them even before then. Ricky Singh did an interview, was able to speak with him, and we were both on the line, and he said that he knew me, and I had come to his house, and I refuted it then that I had never met the guy. I had never gone to his house.
Just for the record, who is Ricky Singh?
Ricky Singh, you know as a journalist. Well, you tell us.
No, just for the record.
Ricky Singh is a journalist, but also a good family friend. And Ricky moved from Guyana and has been living in Barbados for a number of years. His guidance.
You reference the how many copies you hope that he was making, the same visit that you were talking about in the road.
Yes, that was
Really use the word.
Now, just continuing on from that, can you tell us what your role was in WPA, if there was any role at all?
I had no role in the WPA. I was never a party member. I just supported my husband.
Would you go to meetings occasionally?
I went to meetings occasionally, yes.
Well, I say meetings, I mean public meetings.
Public meetings, yes.
I think we need to look at the last paragraph, Friday, June 13th, 1980. Can you take us through
What page?
What page is
What-
same page, bottom paragraph,
Okay.
page 15?
Before you go there, Council,
Certainly.
the witness said she went to public meetings occasionally, but I did see somewhere where she said that she would travel with him
Yes.
for meetings.
Yeah, I would travel,
Certain
yes.
experiences.
I would travel with him if he was going up country, if he was going to London. And we traveled as a family, we always took the children with us.
On the bottom of page 15, your recollections of the morning of June 13th, 1980.
It started off as any normal morning. Either Walter would take the children to school, or I would take them to school. Either one of us took them and one of us picked them up, depending on what was going on. On that morning, Walter took the children to school very early, and he came back home, and we began to talk about the job offer for Zimbabwe, and that he was serious about us going to Zimbabwe. We spent the morning returning books he had borrowed from the Indian High Commission as illustrations for the book Lakshmi out of India. So we did a lot of errands that day. He was also working on the history of the Guyanese working people. All the papers were laid out on the dining room table. That's one of the problems Walter and I had. He had a study, but gradually all his papers would move out everywhere. So it was all over the dining room table because he had planned to come back that night and continue working on volume 2 of the history of the Guyanese people.
So you're at home that day, you're running your errands and so on, and
Yeah, later that day, once we picked up from the children from school, later that evening, Shaka and Kanini were going to attend a farewell party for two friends. Their dad was being transferred to Barbados. And Asha and I, the youngest, were going to attend a film show at her school, St. Agnes School. The arrangement was, since we only had one car, the arrangement was that Walter would drop us off at these various places, and then he would pick us up on his way home from a meeting he was going to have with this person who I now know is Gregory Smith.
and did that arrangement go through, or?
Just before we were about to leave home, Donald came to the house, and Walter told me, "Don't bother, Donald will give me a ride. You take the car, and we'll meet back home after his meeting and my picking up the children from their various activities."
And you proceeded then?
I proceeded, I left, that's the last time I saw him. I left, and Asha and I went to the film show at St. Agnes.
And then, who came to you there? Anyone?
We were enjoying the film, and then Father Malcolm came, and he came into the audience and he said, "We have to leave." And I walked with him to the door, and he said, "Walter's had a terrible accident." And I said, "A car accident?" Because I know Walter was a very careful driver. "And is he okay?" And he said, "No, it's worse than that Walter had been killed." And so I said, "Well, we have to go and pick up Kanini and Shaka." And so I didn't feel I could drive, so I asked Malcolm if he... I'm sorry. Can I take a minute of water?
Just today, today.